But so for the writing process now, and early on when I started, I think I just started small. And I think for anyone who feels overwhelmed while writing their own music or not sure where to start, there's nowhere to start. I mean, every time, even now, I've written quite a bit of music now, but I feel like every time I start, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Welcome to Keep Taking Ground, the Saxophone podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Ryan, and today's guest is a Juno-award winning jazz saxophonist, composer, and arranger. She was born to a Chinese father and a Jewish mother and raised in the multicultural metropolis of Toronto. She earned her first Juno nomination for her debut album, The Sky Was Pale Blue, Then Grey, in 2013. And in 2016, she seized the Juno for Best Jazz Album of the Year in the group category for her album Forest Grove. In 2019, she garnered another Juno nomination for Best Jazz Album of the Year group for Wonder Wonder. And she continues to create genre-defying music that weaves a mosaic of influences into a concoction steeped in the jazz tradition, but skillfully laced with elements of classical, pop, R&B, hip-hop, Latin, and world music. Welcome to the podcast today, Allison Au. How are you doing?
Thank you, Jesse. So glad to be here, and thanks so much for including me in the series.
I'm really happy to have you on. When I moved to Toronto about 8 years ago now, actually this coming Sunday, it would be officially 8 years since I've been living
Wow.
in Toronto. I quickly became aware of you and your work, and really fell in love with your playing and your writing,
Oh, cheers. Thank
and
you.
just like the song that you were able to carve out for yourself and your band. So it's a pleasure to have you here. Um, let's begin at the very beginning. How did you begin playing the saxophone?
Well, it was a bit of a circuitous journey. I started with piano lessons at the
Okay.
age of 6. That was kind of my first introduction to lessons.
Okay.
But even before that, my parents are really avid arts appreciators. They're not in the arts themselves for career or work. But my dad always had a really extensive CD and vinyl collection at home.
Okay.
And they would take us to museums and see concerts and go to festivals and things like that as kids, my brother and sister and I. So I think I was exposed to a lot of music when I was little, even though I didn't really think about it so much. And I used to remember loving to pull CDs and albums off the shelves at home and just look at the covers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then at the age of 6, I kind of following in the footsteps of my brother and sister, who are both older than me. My parents enrolled me in piano lessons. And there was a local teacher just around the corner from our house at the time. And I started taking lessons, and then it wasn't until age 12 where I started band class, which a lot of people do in Ontario. And I was fortunate to attend an art school. So from grades 4 to 8, which is like ages 9 to 14.
Okay.
I attended a school that was half of the day was academics and the other half was a mix of music and visual arts, dancing, and drama classes.
Nice.
Yeah, so then part of that was the band program, and that's when I started playing clarinet for a year.
Okay.
And I think the saxophone for me, I think there was something about it. I mean, I saw a lot of the cool kids playing it.
Yeah.
And it was also the fact that there was the band teacher at the program at the time happened to be a woman who played saxophone.
Amazing.
And she was really energetic, and kind of also was like an additional element that kind of captivated me and drew me towards the instrument.
Yeah.
So even when I was handed the clarinet, I kind of already knew I wanted to play saxophone for a long time. I think as early as age 9, I kind of knew, even before the band class started.
Wow.
So yeah, they're kind of like a confluence of influences for me, but just like there was an aura about it, I think that really drew me to it.
Wow. And so you began playing, you went through art school, and at what point did you discover jazz or the music that you really love doing right now?
I mean, jazz, I discovered, I think I remember as early as age 6. So
Okay.
probably around the time I was playing piano or just starting to play piano. So part of my dad's vinyl collection was like, he had a lot of opera and world music and then also a lot of jazz.
Okay.
So I think I knew that I liked the sound of jazz even before I started playing saxophone.
Okay.
And then I later realized that saxophone was part of that heritage of
Right.
the genre. So some sounds that were really compelling to me would have been like the Nat King Cole trio. I remember hearing that at a very young age. And then the music of Ella Fitzgerald and becoming familiar with her scatting, and then as well as Louis Armstrong. That was really
Right.
some earlier examples of jazz. Even before I heard the saxophone, I was aware of those groups.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew I liked the sound of that. There was something about it that was very, captivating to me.
Great. And was there a defining moment for you where you said, you know what, I want to be a musician. I want to pursue having a career in music, or at least pursue the saxophone seriously?
Yeah, I really don't think I had like an epiphany to that when I realized that I wanted to pursue a career in music. I don't think it happened for me like it does for a lot of our peers.
Mm-hmm.
So it took me a very, very long time. When I was enrolling for college, I was really intending to do a science-based degree and wasn't intending to pursue music at all.
Mm-hmm.
So my intention to do a music program, I mean, I knew I really liked playing saxophone, and I think part of my motivation to start a college level program was just to do it for a year because I wanted to learn more about it and learn how to improvise better and learn more theory and the mechanics of how jazz works.
Yeah.
But there was really no intention to pursue a career in music. And even after graduation, I really wasn't sure as to what I was going to do professionally.
Wow.
I was fortunate enough to live at home for many years,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of bought me some time. I mean, I was still working at the time, but I didn't have the pressure to support myself living in an apartment, things like that. So I was really fortunate to have parents that were supportive and let me kind of explore what I wanted to do in music if I were to take it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
But to learn the saxophone, I mean, I think it happened earlier, probably in my elementary school years when I attended this art school.
Mm-hmm.
Those years were very formative for me to kind of develop a passion about the saxophone.
Okay.
And I think then I decided that I really loved it. Not really knowing where it would take me quite yet at that point, but it's probably around that time that I decided I was really committed to learning the saxophone.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so you said something that was really interesting. You said, so after you graduated, you were still living at home, but you were working. And I know a lot of people, a lot of my peers, including myself, at some point had to work outside of music. Were you working outside of music?
No, not that time. I was teaching privately.
Okay, right.
So I was just doing a lot of odd jobs, subbing for friends, trying to get some students. So it was music related.
Right.
Doing some tutoring in music theory. So I kind of kept it within what I thought I wanted to do, but I just wasn't sure. So I think I kind of had one foot in music and then one foot thinking that I might actually abandon it completely.
Right.
But yeah, so I was kind of trying to diversify within music a little bit.
So how did you balance your teaching and having to do the jobbing sort of thing with being creative and writing music and carving out the sound for yourself and your band that you have? Because that takes a considerable amount of conception and then work to actually execute it and keep a band together as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it was a lot of trial and error, to be honest. I knew upon graduation from the college program I did, I wanted to start my own band. That was like a very, very strong element for me. And I had a really positive experience in college, but I wasn't like a prodigy kind of musician at school. I was really like an average, inexperienced player coming in. And I was very inspired by the peers who I was surrounded by and the level of playing they came in with and the experience of performance that a lot of my friends had. And I really didn't come into the college program with that kind of playing or playing experience rather.
Yeah.
So I felt that a lot of like kind of the coveted opportunities that I think a lot of students get at school, I was never handed those types of opportunities. So the motivation to start my band was to carve out an experience, performance-wise, playing-wise, creating a platform for myself to write music for that I didn't get in school. And again, not coming from a negative place at all. I think it was coming from a place of like wanting to do more with it. I was I left school thinking like, what else can I do? Because I didn't think I got enough, or I just wanted to create that for myself in some way or simulate that. So that's really where the seeds of forming my band came from, was to create an opportunity for myself that I didn't have coming out of school. And upon graduation, I mean, I wasn't one of those musicians that people asked to play. I really had to create that for myself as well. So I think something to share with listeners who may be listening right now is just, if you feel like things are not being handed to you, which I think is common for a lot of people, find a way to create it for yourself. Because that's totally a mantra, and something that I can say from experience has worked for me in a way that you can really weave your own web in that way, and create a platform for yourself that will lead to other opportunities down the road. So that's really how the band started for me. And juggling that with teaching, I mean, I just made sure that I had time to allocate every week to write a little bit, to rehearse with the band, the guys that I wanted to play with. And the first few years coming out of school, I mean, I was just sessioning a lot with people. I wasn't necessarily building my band quite yet. I think I was starting to formulate, ideas as to what I liked in different musicians and elements of their playing that I wanted to bounce ideas off of. And that's kind of how I found the musicians for the project that I ended up taking more seriously.
Great. Did you actually schedule that time into your week, or was it kind of like you just had a pattern of getting together with musicians, so it just kind of happened?
I think it was a bit more organic. I mean, now I'm very intentional about how I work, but I think those early years I wasn't. And actually, one crystallizing experience for me is right after graduation, I did a cruise ship contract, which at that time, when I was in school, a lot of students were doing that in the summer months to just kind of make some more money. And I didn't have the opportunity to do it between my school years. So I did it like for 5 months right after graduation. So right after my 4th year of college. And that for me was a very concrete work experience involving music that certainly was not the most creative, but I think exposed me to the realities of when music can really feel like a job, and when you're really having to fulfill a certain task and a certain role. And you're required in only a very, very specific and narrow capacity of your capabilities. And I think part of that experience was that I was away from my community of peers. So in those 5 months, I think that's when I really decided more than ever that I was really determined to start my own band. And sometimes experiences like that, they're not always the most positive, because they don't always, what's the word? Like, you may not always enjoy it, but I think on the flip side, it is a very reaffirming experience, because it reminds you about what you actually want to do creatively. So perhaps if I had any like crystallizing moment, it was probably during my time doing a contract like that for 5 months.
That's good. And I think the advice that you gave just about, if you went through a degree program and you probably wasn't one of the top players and you were struggling, it's not the end. It's not the end. I've heard that so many times from people like yourself, or people like even professors of mine when I was at Humber. There were a couple of them that said, I wasn't one of the star musicians when I was at this program, but when I graduated, I worked hard, and then they were able to see some measure of success from that work that they put in. So I think that's important. And the reality is that in the industry, there isn't as much work as there was 20 years ago. So there's a small percentage of people that's going to get some of the top opportunities. So I really believe, and I agree, it's imperative for musicians, aspiring professional saxophonists, to try to have a vision for themselves while navigating life, and carve out those opportunities for themselves. I totally agree. So from that point, you've graduated, you put your band together, you began writing. What are you in pursuit of? Because you said there wasn't a clear moment for you where you said, okay, I'm going to pursue a career in music, but there was something that kept you going, one, and then two, you seem to be committed to the process in some way. So what have you been in pursuit of, and what are you currently in pursuit of?
I think that's a great question. I think earlier, when I was just starting out with my ensemble and just kind of formulating ideas as to what I wanted to do with a band, I mean, my main goal was quite concrete. I just wanted to write music.
Okay.
And as many tunes as I could. So at that point, it was like quantity over quality.
Just develop the
skill. I do remember at some point, I just tried to set the goal, like, okay, I'm going to try to write 10 songs. Or a bigger goal is like, can I write 30 songs? How many songs can I write? Because I think through that process, and what I've read from some of my idols, a lot of it is just doing. And not every song's going to be great, but you just have to like write, because you're going to get there at some point. You just have to try to keep exercising that muscle.
Yeah.
So I think early on, I just tried to write music, and then try to bring it into the ensemble, play it. We ended up vetoing a lot of music. Like, there's a lot of music I have written that I still have charts for that we never ended up developing or playing further. We would have played it for maybe a few gigs, and then that was it. Like, it kind of just went out the door. So yeah, I mean, that writing music, and also just cultivating an attitude, I think at that time, of being open. So the musicians that I chose to work with, I've really tried to exercise an openness, and I've really tried to detach myself from the music that I write too, if that makes any sense. Because oftentimes we get so attached. We have to think of like the process of practicing and writing music is so solitary that we can get really inside our own head and get really attached to it in a way that when you bring it to other people to play in an improvising context, like so much of jazz is, we really have to be open to other types of feedback and criticism, constructive criticism.
Yeah. Hopefully
it's not too negative.
Yeah.
But allowing your band members to imbue in the music what they think they hear as well, and being open to that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, so much of our creative process, like, I mean, I am the sole contributor for the repertoire in my ensemble, but I really don't feel like it's my project. I mean, obviously it's under my name, but the guys, when we come together, like once we have a group meeting or a group session, it's like I really try to detach myself from the music, and let them like literally rip it apart, because we end up changing a lot of stuff on the feedback that I get from the guys. So I think at that time, like early on, trying to write music and then just trying to find a way to commit to the writing process and then detach myself from the rehearsal process.
Right.
And that's something that we take very seriously in my ensemble, is that if a song doesn't work, we don't play it. And for me as the writer, I think I've really tried to get better at like not caring. And I think that's something like I want to say that because it's something that I think is challenging. And early on, a little bit hard in a way, like, oh, I really like that song, I thought it was going to work. But I think the more you can let go, and this is for anybody, like the more you can let go of the music, I think the better the music gets, which is really, it's almost like on the contrary, like you don't think that would work in that way. But it's almost like the less you care in the rehearsal process, the better the music is going to be.
Right.
At least that's been my experience.
No, it's been my experience too. I think it's something that I had to learn. I remember when I just started writing and putting a band together, I had a really clear idea of what I wanted to sound like. And if the guys didn't do that, I would kind of get uptight about it.
Yeah.
And over the last couple of years of working with my current band and having the opportunity to play the music, or like over a 2-year period,
Mm-hmm.
the music has changed and evolved from their input, and that's where the music really lives and breathes. And I think, you
Yeah.
know, you mentioned sort of like taking the process of putting your band together slowly and just trying out different people and seeing what they bring. I think that's a really important part of the process of putting a band together, because
Yeah.
everybody has their thing. And I think the ideal situation would be putting a band together of people that where you allow them to be fully themselves and contribute
Yes.
to the music, you know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
while serving the music, but everybody has the opportunity to be in their element. So and as a band leader and a composer, you have to be open to allow them to do that. So yeah, and that's good.
Absolutely. And
That's
finding
really
people
good.
that you really creatively trust. Because I
Yeah.
think if you surround yourself with those people, when you bring music in, which is really like, for me, feels like my babies, you know, like it feels like it's coming from you, and it's a fragile thing to some extent. But when you bring it to people you really trust creatively, there can be no wrong in that sense. So I think it's really important when you're finding people that you really resonate with musically and you want them to be part of your band or ensemble, whatever, um, surrounding yourself with those people so that you know you can trust your music with them. And if they have a suggestion, like, go with it, because it might take you to places you might not otherwise have imagined. And I think that's slowly what I started to find, is that when I entrusted them even more each
Yeah.
time, the music goes places you can't fathom. And I think that's a really good thing, because you want those people to stretch you and challenge you.
Amazing. What are some of the things that you value in some of your saxophone heroes?
Oh, that's so hard, because I think there's so many things that are subjective, obviously, and
Okay.
everybody hears different things that they resonate with in different players.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for me, I'm sure it's a lot of the same things that so many people look for. I mean, I'm listening for sound and facility of technique, and I think, I mean, those are kind of like the nuts and bolts things that I always
Yeah.
listen for. But I think on a broader scale, I'm listening for originality. I love really playful musicians that
Mm.
um, can take a theme and like morph it 500 different ways in their improvisations.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, as a composer myself, I love listening to really creatively written music,
Mm-hmm.
and melodic ideas that are new to me and kind of take me on an adventure. So I tend to gravitate. I mean, some of the saxophone players that I love are also really avid composers themselves. And some people that come to mind are like Wayne Shorter, who's been a really
Mm.
huge influence in my writing.
Yeah.
And also just someone as like a role model as a saxophone player who also wrote very prolifically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so
Absolutely.
yeah, kind of like
Yeah.
some things that I listen for.
Cool. Cool. And throughout this conversation, we've mentioned composition a couple times, and that seems to be a huge part of your process, um, of how basically how you've continued to keep taking ground in your career and your creative journey. And so I'd like us to talk about your process of composition, and how you conceptualize a song, and how you might go about making it a reality. Just kind of just talking about that process a little bit more.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, maybe I can kind of introduce this idea by saying that I had a very wonderful teacher and mentor when I was in college, who was very encouraging of me writing music and arranging my own music, and
Mm-hmm.
really um, accepting and embracing the idea of doing things on your own, like try to do it yourself,
Yeah.
because then you create your own world and your own
Yeah.
musical realm.
Mm-hmm.
But he really strongly encouraged me to write my own music specifically. And I think at that time he was really kind of saying it from a place of, don't worry about having to pay rights or royalty rights to record covers or
Mm-hmm.
other
Mm-hmm.
jazz standards, which I hold very dear to my heart as well. I love playing jazz standards.
Yeah.
But he was really encouraging me to write my own music so I don't have to worry about paying royalties and, you know, licensing fees and all that stuff,
Yeah.
if I were to record that music.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was coming from kind of a more technical place, but that really stuck with me. And I think at a early point, like when I was still in college, I kind of had in the back of my mind, okay, just write your own music.
Yeah.
So that was part of why I started writing and took it a lot more seriously after graduation.
Okay.
But so for the writing process now, and early on when I started, I think I just started small. And I think for anyone who feels overwhelmed by writing their own music or not sure where to start, there's nowhere to start. I mean, every time, even now, I've written quite a bit of music now, but I feel like every time I start, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I think it's one of those things that never really leaves, like that element of feeling unsure as how to start. I think that's constant. And I've heard that too with people who write books and poetry and literary writers. I think they find the same thing. You just have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So usually now what my process includes is starting with a very short idea.
Okay.
And I do have a book of manuscript. I have several books of manuscript, but I'll start with a 2-bar phrase. It might be a bass line. It might just be a melody, something that I find compelling, but it's really short. And I'll just write that idea down really quickly when I think of it, or if I'm sitting at the piano and noodling around. And then I might leave it and I might just flip the page and write a different idea, or, you know, I have a book of different ideas. And then I might come back to those ideas later and then see if I can develop it. Or perhaps if it's like in the example of a melody, I might just try to find a bass counterpart. Awesome. So keeping things really simple, I think actually entails a lot, because you can take things quite far if you just think of it in a simple way.
Right.
So part of it's mindset and just being open to hearing different sounds using a very simple cell of an idea. Maybe it's a rhythm that really inspires you. So write it out or record yourself and see if you can start layering ideas on top. So that's kind of how my ideas stem, is just one thing and then I put something else on top.
Right.
And that if that inspires a new section, I'll write that. Or maybe I might just keep layering. Sometimes I have ideas for vamps and I'll just write a melody or 2 or 3 on top and seeing which one works. Or maybe I end up using that later in the process by distributing those parts amongst the instruments later. So trying to keep an open mind as to how the mechanics might work and not being too particular, I think really helps.
Would you mind taking us through that process right now? And
Absolutely.
Awesome. So let's do that.
Okay.